Sabrina 70s comic issue 30. The story starts out with Sabrina telling Hilda she's corny for being old-fashioned, saying that a broom is a stereotype of a witch, and she shows her a projected picture of a witch with a pointed hat. Why is she bothering to try to talk her out of this? Hilda says it's been good enough for hundreds of years, so you'd think she would have been sick of it at that point, but it's normal to her. Logically, a society wouldn't keep the same fashion for all of its people throughout hundreds of years. In fact, we saw the other teenagers at the witch night school dressed like normal people, and they weren't insulted for it by the teacher. So times have already started changing. Why did it take hundreds of years? Sabrina says that's a tired old image. This is a conversation she would have had with her years ago as a child. Hilda has every reason to think that Sabrina's image of a witch on a motorcycle is dumb. Like it or not, that's not recognizable as a witch. Sure, a witch could fly on their own with magic faster than they could go on a motorcycle, but you could say the same thing about them flying on a broom. Why would they need to do that? It's actually amusing to me that Ambrose says, the solution, as usual, lies with the men. And maybe the reason it's funny is because the male witches are treated like the inferior ones. So he's only saying that because that's the way he's perceived to be on Earth, and he desperately clings to that to feel better. He says that both their traveling methods are based on vanity, trying to show off. He says men are more logical, and if a warlock wants to go somewhere, he just teleports there. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Why don't all the witches just teleport instead of flying on brooms? That'd take longer. They'd only ever fly somewhere for fun. Sabrina asks how you're supposed to explain yourself zapping yourself into a crowd. Rather than saying, I brainwashed them to forgetting they saw me warp there, he mentions places that people don't tend to be at, like a nearby alley and a deserted hallway, which he could warp to if he wants to go to a fancy ball at the Empire Hotel tonight. But what if he gets spotted anyways by a few people? People do go to alleys. He immediately gets beaten up when he warps to an alley, even though he should have heard them, which would have given him plenty of time to use his magic against them. Why does that have to happen? It's not remotely funny, and it's trying to portray him as wrong, but he was only wrong because of a contrivance. If he had just brainwashed them, he wouldn't have gotten hurt. So it's like the writer's trying to prove a point, and failing miserably. Sabrina asks Ambrose to come with her to the mansion outside Palm Springs, because the Duchess of Kachu is entertaining tonight. Why is she invited? I thought witches hated Sabrina. Maybe she's only there because they love Hilda, but wouldn't she just be mistreated? Ambrose plans on going by warping to a desolate plateau in the desert that overlooks the mansion. But sadly, he warps into the pool of a motel, and asks when they built that place. Obviously, he would have warped to a desert, because he would have imagined a desert. It's not like he used a teleporter machine that was programmed to warp to him to specific coordinates, and it was just out of date. Why would he have been to those coordinates before so that he could choose them again? This was just forced to happen to make Ambrose get humiliated. Why does he have to be humiliated when it's so obvious teleporting is smarter? Sabrina's like, oh, what if you get seen? Well, anytime a witch rides a broom, I'm thinking, what if they get seen? Wouldn't she be seen when she lands anyways? What if someone decided to look up and saw her? What if a bird watcher saw her? If you're flying a broom, you're in the sky for longer, so there's more time when you could get observed. In the next story, Hilda sees Harvey going to her house and cathartically says, why doesn't he go bother somebody else and give me a break for a change? She says that he's a walking disaster. Then why doesn't she do something to fix that? She's a witch. And she could use magic to make Sabrina not want to complain about it. Sabrina actually blames her for it, saying that if Hilda was nice to him, he wouldn't be nervous around her. Since when is he ever nervous around her? Hilda smacks his back and he spills some coke on her waxed floor. And she slips and breaks some eggs and gets some bag of flour on her head. Too bad Hilda has nowhere to go if she doesn't like Harvey being at her house. I'm just wondering why, if she's the authority figure and she's okay with sending Sabrina to a witch night school she hates, She's not also okay with forbidding Harvey from ever visiting her house. Sabrina tells Harvey to be nice to Hilda because it's her birthday, so he cleans everything up and ends up pouring hot tea in her hand. And she's so burnt by it that she falls on her head. Then he steps on her ankle when he tries to walk over to call the doctor. So the story ends with Hilda looking injured, which she could have easily avoided if she exerted any actual authority over Sabrina. To be fair, Sabrina's a witch too, so she might use her magic to change her mind. She's never brainwashed her aunts before, and I guess I have to assume she'd think brainwashing them would be crossing a line. She could make Hilda like Harvey whenever she wants. Hilda only did one thing in this story that anyone could disapprove of, and it's not like Harvey's totally innocent. If she was smart, she'd use a potion ingredient to completely heal herself and erase people's memories of the fact that she got hurt. After a comedy page where Hilda says she needs a 3-stage broom to visit the moon, and she doesn't explain that what's special about it is that it creates an air bubble around her. The next story starts where she reads a newspaper headline about a UFO seen by a seeing eye dog. Then she panics about a red flying saucer, which has to be a frisbee. Doesn't she realize a UFO would only ever be really big so that people could actually see it from far away? She's lived on Earth for centuries. I guess she assumes that they're really tiny aliens. Finally, after Sabrina teases her when in a series with witches in it, aliens wouldn't be out of the question either, especially since witches come from their own realm, so they're aliens too. Harvey shows up and says that it was his frisbee and he was throwing it out in the hall instead of outdoors like a normal person. Hilda then decides to get far away from Harvey before she'd lose her temper and rearrange his face. So then why didn't she do that last story and avoid being tortured? Harvey only bothers her by accident, and isn't a great character, so that's not such a great rival giving her a comeuppance. I guess he'd be more unlikable if he did bother her on purpose though. Then I'd wonder why Sabrina was putting up with them. She flies above her roof and sees the frisbee, afraid of it, so she uses magic to make it go away. And the story ends with the revelation that this was an actual UFO with aliens in it, who can somehow speak English, and decide to get away from Earth because of this. So she might have saved the planet from an alien invasion for all we know. In the next comedy page, Sabrina tells Hilda that she can make her pencil do her homework for her, but she gets an F on her assignment because she used a dull pencil. And she didn't look at the assignment after it was written? Really? She didn't even so much as glance at it when she was walking up to the teacher and about to hand it to her? That won't happen. In the next story, realistically, Hilda gets made fun of for dressing like a witch. But it's okay with me because the guy actually made a clever quip about it. She could make a good living renting herself out to scare people with the hiccups. Yeah, why doesn't she? I wish I knew how she did make a living. I assume she sells her things after they become antiques. Sadly, the guys just move on to making fun of her for being ugly, though it's at least in a kind of clever way instead of simply saying she's ugly. So how in the world is Hilda waiting this long to try to get revenge? Her figure looks just as skinny as Sabrina's, by the way. Somehow, the guys in front of her don't turn around and react to her saying that she's gonna turn them into frogs. After Sabrina tries to stop her, and she reveals that she looked great when she was younger, she uses magic to summon a bear to scare them away, which would severely hurt them or kill them if it caught up to them. Sabrina says she can change her image by taking her to a beauty seminar. And I guess Hilda agrees with her, since she's going to it instead of just being too proud of how she's pretty by witch standards. I mean, she barely spent any time in the witch realm. She would have less trouble most of the time if she looked pretty by mortal standards. She fortunately doesn't take offense and turn him into a frog when he says that she has a ridiculous Halloween costume. It's not even bad looking. It's purple. That's more interesting than a black witch costume. He gives her a wig and a ridiculous amount of makeup. So I'm glad she's relatable by saying, I feel like a clown putting all this junk on. He says that anything would be an improvement. I guess she's planning revenge after he's done helping. She's told that men will be falling at her feet later, and she giggles and hopes that he means that. Why doesn't an evil witch like her just use magic to make men do that? I guess even she thinks that's a step too far. Otherwise, she'd already have a boyfriend. Maybe she knows Sabrina wouldn't stop whining and lecturing her about it. Of course, Hilda looks terrible with the wig, and her face was hopeless anyways. So because the guy at the beauty parlor's not impressed, Hilda hits him with her purse, which might not have happened if he was a girl like I expected, because then she wouldn't have tried to hit on him. The story ends with Sabrina saying Hilda looks better in basic black, when she's clearly wearing purple. I guess she's encouraging her to look even more stereotypical just so she'll feel better. The first story is about Ambrose trying to simply warp to places and failing. The first time, he fails because he gets beaten up in an alley, when obviously would have had more than enough time to fight back with magic, because those guys were talking before they went up to him. Also, you'd think they would have seen him warp there and scream and run away, which is the only thing I imagined would be the negative consequence of this. The second time, he warps into a pool at a hotel, when he was clearly thinking about a desert instead. That was frustrating. The second story is about Hilda getting herself hurt for the most part, though Harvey does end up injuring her at the end, all through a series of accidents in her house because she didn't just leave the house, or tell Sabrina she's not allowed to have boys over, like I'd expect every parent to say. The third story is about Hilda being scared of a frisbee she mistakes for a UFO first, and then when she flies out of the house to get away from Harvey, she ends up sending away an actual UFO. I like that twist. It shows self-awareness of the series after a witch laughed at the idea of a UFO. The final story is about some guys lampshading Hilda's appearance, and after she scares them away, she beats up a beauty parlor guy because he failed to make her look good. After Sabrina said that she needed a makeover, I immediately remembered that she made Hilda look good in the first issue of the 90s comic. Or rather, she failed, and Hilda herself did that to humor her. Wouldn't Sabrina make her look good with her magic? That'd make more sense than Hilda wasting money at the beauty parlor. And I guess the reason she won't get prosecuted for assault after this is that she's a witch, so she'd scare away and brainwash any cops who showed up. But wouldn't they just keep sending cops over and over? Maybe the guy didn't call the police because it's the 70s, so he was too ashamed of getting hit by a girl.